Hi, this is Josh with Hike Logistics, and this is Trailheads, the show where we get to introduce you to the other trailheads out there, the people who love the trail as much as you do. And today I'm happy to introduce to you Paul Stutzman, who is an AT thru-hiker, also known as Apostle, and who is the author of Hiking Through, One Man's Journey to Peace and Freedom on the Appalachian Trail. Now, Paul, it's good to have you on today, and nice to appreciate you taking some time to chat with me about your hike on the Appalachian Trail and about the events that you described in your book. Your book was a very interesting book to me. I really enjoyed reading the book, and one of the things that I thought was so significant about the book and about the way you presented your own hike was that you were very open and candid about your reasons for hiking the book. And you had some very personal reasons for hiking the Appalachian Trail when you did. And it was specifically that you had lost someone in your life. And I've read the book, of course, but our viewers, many of them have not. So if you would, just tell everyone why it was that you hiked the trail.
Well, the reason for the hike was the death of my wife, Mary, from breast cancer. I was a restaurant manager in Ohio's Amish country, and we've got, I think we're up to like 5 million tourists a year. So I had a big restaurant catered to tourists, 700 seats, and it was a great job, but the job was no longer satisfying me. And so my pastor had told me after the funeral to look for signs from God that are just for you. But he said, don't do anything drastic for a year. He obviously knew me pretty well, and he knew I'd take off and do hikes and that type of thing. And so I decided, I stayed a year, but then after about a year, I thought, you know what, I had reached a certain level of healing, but when you lose a loved one, grief is really, it is tough. And so I decided I'm going to take a risk, and I'm going to quit my job and go hike the trail. And I'd read just about every book I could on the trail. And I should kind of warn you too, I'm north of the Mason-Dixon line, so we say Appalachian Trail, and I know it drives people crazy. It's down south, they say Appalachian. I just can't do it. So to me, it's Appalachian Trail. So just forgive me for that. But I determined to walk away from a really good, high-paying job to go out on the trail and just dialogue with God and ask God if there's a reason, if there's a purpose. My question really was this: is it random that you take loved ones like that, or is there a reason for it? And I realized in my hike that God does not cause bad things in our life, but he can take bad and turn it into good. And in my hike on the trail, I had such a walk with God. When I finally got rid of all my stress, the noise, the people, and I was just out in the woods, and I'm just talking to God like I'm talking to you today. And it just made the difference in my life. And that's what led to the book, Hiking Through. And it's about the freedom I found out there on the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, you just even in your introduction there, I have looked at a few of the reviews for your book online, and a number of people have read your book. It's a popular book, and by and large, the reviews are exceptional. People love the book. There is, however, one criticism that seems to come up more than any other criticism, and that criticism is, as you likely know, that the book is too religious. What would you say to the people who think that your book is too preachy or too religious?
I would tell them I love your comments, and the book was written with that in mind. There's a lot of people that love nature, they love hiking, and they're not spiritual, they're not religious, they're nothing. And so I decided I'm going to write a book about the Appalachian Trail, which a lot of guys like, especially, and ladies too. And for me, I'm a Christian, and so I follow Jesus, and that's number one in my life. And why wouldn't you want to write about what's number one in your life? And so if we're followers of Jesus, we need to be bold. I mean, there's enough weakness around us, so let's just stand up and state what we believe. And I believe following Jesus is the way to go. And so I've had people read that, and they've literally got saved by reading that. And so to me, that's powerful, to be a restaurant manager and write words that people can turn their life over to Christ. I'm always kind of curious about it, though, is why does it offend people? I mean, I love to read. I'll read books about other people's beliefs, and I never get offended. It's like, probably because I know most of their beliefs they're not, in my opinion, they're not true. and following Jesus is the truth. And I think there's just people who cannot handle that truth.
There was an interesting comment that you made in your book, and because the book is not in some ways, it's not primarily a religious book in the sense that, you don't spend a majority of the time in the book talking about spiritual things or religious things. However, your own theology and your own beliefs do feature prominently in the book. But there's a particular comment that you make at one point in your book where you say that on your AT thru hike, you lost your religion and gained your spirituality. What did you mean by that?
I was born Amish, and I was raised very strict conservative Mennonite. And in my upbringing, we literally had a piece of paper. It was called a standard. And that piece of paper outlined how I could dress, what I could go. I could not go to ball games, movies, fairs, festival. I couldn't do anything. Couldn't have a radio, TV, nothing like that. And so I had to follow those rules. Now, as long as I followed those rules, and I did follow them until I no longer did, but when I followed them, I felt I was good. I was fine. I was religious. And so as obviously, as I grew older and became mainstream Mennonite, I realized that those were just rules. But on the trail, I met all these people with different backgrounds. For instance, I hiked with a Catholic priest on sabbatical, and him and I are best friends. And we were talking one day, and I said, his trail name was Padre. I said, Padre, some of your terms in your belief, I just don't understand them. And he said, well, let me tell you what my belief is. He said, I believe that Jesus died on the cross and his blood forgives our sins. I said, well, that's what I believe too. And I said, if we both start there, I said, I can probably overlook the rest of that. But I also hiked with people who were atheists. I hiked with people from all kinds of backgrounds. And I learned that they're human like me. They've got a soul like me. And I just did not judge them. And I know this is about the hike, but I did a bike ride across America too, where I met people across America and biked with them that had beliefs that were different from mine. And I just learned to accept these people. And I realized on the trail that, as a follower of Jesus, Jesus came to this earth to get rid of all the rules that were in the Old Testament. And so I realized I had to get rid of some of those rules growing up too. That's religion. And spirituality is just being, a follower of Jesus. What would Jesus do?
And what about maybe people who are not necessarily Christian, but just do you tend to find that people are more open on the trail about their own beliefs, whatever they may be?
Oh my goodness, you probably can't find any better people than hikers. They're out in nature, and even if you're not a believer, nature is healing, flowers and trees and views, and that's just wonderful. And so I had the best discussions out there, sitting on a mountaintop on a rock formation, looking out over the Shenandoah Valley, and just open discussions. And even the people I talked to that didn't believe what I believed, they were open to it. They just sometimes say, you know what, I just don't believe that. And but no, the hikers are some of the best people you'll find.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But it's amazing how fast you get to know someone on the trail. There's nothing like the trail for getting to know people in a very meaningful way, quickly.
Exactly.
It's one of the things. Yeah.
Right. And in my case, I was what's called a thru-hiker, which meant I hiked the entire trail in one season. And so my group of people were mainly thru-hikers. And if you're going to do a 2,000 plus mile hike, there's a reason for it. In a lot of cases, right. It was a loss of a spouse, it was divorce, loss of a job. And so we had a lot in common in that regard. And then also, like, there's section hikers out there and day hikers. And anytime we come to a shelter where there's like a section hiker, day hiker, and they realize we're thru hikers, they want to hear our stories. And so that was often the case at night in a shelter. We're just talking about stories about what we've seen. I still remember one day I was up in Maine. It was a beautiful setting at the top of a mountain in the woods, a nice creek in front of it. And I actually set my tent up in the shelter. And there was two hikers in there, two young guys in there that day, and they were just yapping away and saying how their day was. They were like a section hiker, and they said, we did an incredible mileage today. We got 17 miles in the day. And they asked me how far I went. I said, right now I'm at 29 and a half miles. They looked at me and said, whoa, we want to hear your stories. And so three of us sat there and we just told stories. But so it's just, the camaraderie is really great.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk about some of the special memories you have on the trail, And in particular, some of the most serene and peaceful moments I've ever had in my life have been on a trail somewhere. And I'm just wondering if you can remember any particular place or time or moment in your thru hike that stands out as a particularly serene or peaceful time.
Yeah, that's kind of a question like I get asked sometimes. Did you ever want to quit? And I say, yeah, every day. But and then the question to you is serene times. Yeah, I've had many of those, but there's one that comes to mind, and that was a day in Virginia. Virginia's got some beautiful views. And another hiker that I was with, I just met up with him a day or two before. We're hiking together, and we're going up a mountain called Humpback Mountain, and it's in the Shenandoah National Park. And we both pitched our tents in a clearing, and then the other gentleman went out on the rock formation to eat his meal, and I was cooking my meal in the tent, and he called over to me and he said, Apostle, you got to get out here and see this. And so I walked out with my food near on top of the mountain rock formation, and the sun was going down, and these rocks were still warm from the sun that day. And as I looked out over the vast Shenandoah Valley, the sun was going down, and all these lights kept coming on across the valley. And I'm sitting up there just like the king of the mountain, watching this valley light up. And I just visualized in my mind all these families coming together in their houses. And it was just such a serene evening to see this beautiful valley. And the two of us were the only ones that actually saw that.
Right. There are several of those views in Shenandoah National Park, as you know, and I have a similar memory myself. I don't remember what mountain it was on. I would have to consult a map maybe, but same view, same thing. Sunset, the lights come on in the valley below, and people are doing their own little thing down there, and here's you with a front row seat
Absolutely.
to this theater. Yeah. You talked about wanting to quit every day. What was your absolute worst experience on the trail?
Well, every time I thought I had the worst one, it got worse. and so there's probably 5 of them. The first one was go to Paris Mountain, a lightning storm, and it was horrible. The lightning and thunder, and it was cold. And I thought, well, at least it can't get any worse. Well, when you say that, it does. And then probably the worst one happened. I was leaving Harper's Ferry, and Harper's Ferry is West Virginia, and then you're in Maryland pretty quickly. And I had just entered Maryland. And all of a sudden, this wind came up, and some branches started breaking off, and one hit me on my shoulder, and I heard this big roar, and I knew I was in trouble. So I looked out in an open field, and there's a tree out there. I literally ran out to that tree with my backpack on the back, and I put my arms around that tree while this tornado came through onto the side and ripped out a couple hundred trees, and it was horrible. I literally thought I was going to die. And I remember grabbing that tree, I was down on my knees, and I'm praying, and I'm saying, God, you know what? I'm fine. If it's time to come home, I'll be glad to do that. But then the storm passed. I went out back on the trail, and there's just trees destroyed everywhere. And so for about 2 miles, I had to pick my way through those trees. And I finally made it through there. Then there's another day up in Maine. The White Mountains are tough, and then Maine is really tough too. And up in Maine, they have what's called a sag. A sag is like in between the two mountains. It's like a swampy area. And in 2008 was the wettest year in the history of Maine, so I had water everywhere. And they had these bog boards that you walk across. Well, some of these bog boards were underwater, and so I'm tapping along with my hiking sticks, and I miss it. I literally fall in the bog up to my waist, and it was absolutely so scary. And so I pulled myself out, and I found a creek, jumped in the creek, and cleaned up as best as I could. And then there's one other happening. I was on the Chairback Mountain in the 100-mile wilderness, and it was so cold that day. I'd done like 7 or 8 miles, and the Chairback shelter is right up by the trail. So I threw my backpack in there, and then I went down the mountainside to get water. And it had rained so much that I couldn't even find the water source, but there was water laying everywhere. But on the way down, I fell. I fell head over heels twice, and I thought I had broken my arm, but I got up, and then I checked everything. I was still fine. I went down, and I filtered water right out of the swamp. Going back, and the same place, I fell again. and that's when I absolutely had a meltdown. I literally shook my fist at God and said, God, you've abandoned me. You're not with me anymore. But I got more water. I went back up to the shelter, and it was so cold that day that I could not even light my lighter to light my gas stove. It was that cold. And so what I finally did was I took my little burner, turned the gas valve on, and let the gas start flowing. And then I took my lighter and just held it and kind of hit it with my hands like you do like a flint.
Right.
And meanwhile, there was a gas bubble forming. And finally, that thing lit and it just went poof and burned up all the hair in my arm. But 11 o'clock, I'm in that shelter and I'm done for the day. And those are probably the 5 worst ones.
Well, so some hairy and scary ones to be sure, I guess. Now, you've had a number of adventures since the Appalachian Trail, right?
Yes, I have.
List some of those for us real quickly. What are some of these other great adventures that you've gone on?
2 years after the hike, I did a bike ride across America on a bicycle. Instead of going coast to coast, 3,000 miles, I did some research, and I started at the northwest corner of Washington State, the geographical corner of continental America, and pedaled to Key West, Florida, diagonally, the opposite corner, 5,000 miles, and wrote a book called Biking Across America. And then several years later, I tried to kayak the Mississippi River on a kayak and got stuck in the swamps up in Minnesota. And I wrote a book called Stuck in the Weeds about that trip. But that book, Stuck in the Weeds, has a second story in it about a hike I did in Spain on the Camino de Santiago. A lot of your hikers will recognize that
Sure.
name. It's a very famous hike in Spain. It's a pilgrimage. And so I did that in 2013. And that is in the book, Stuck in the Weeds. And that is an incredible hike. If anybody wants a hike that's not as difficult as the Appalachian Trail, you don't have to carry near as much weight. There's water, there's food. And at night, you're in cathedrals, you're in services. It's an amazing journey. And then 2 years ago, I did a hike in Israel. I backpacked and hitchhiked in Israel. There's a trail there called the Jesus Trail. It starts in Nazareth, goes through Cana to the Sea of Galilee. And another buddy of mine and I did that. We hiked there to the Sea of Galilee. It's amazing to walk where Jesus walked, where he picked his disciples. And then from the Sea of Galilee, we hitchhiked to the Golan Heights, which not many tours do that. And then we went to Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Dead Sea and so forth. And then I wrote a book on that one called The 13th Disciple. And it's about how I imagined walking along the Sea of Galilee and meeting Jesus, offering to be a disciple. And he said, I already got 12. And I just said, well, I'll be your 13th, which in essence, we all, as followers of Jesus, we all are disciples. And those are the adventures and books. This last summer, my plan was to ride a bicycle around all 5 Great Lakes and write a book about water, the life of water and the water of life. I did Lake Ontario, but since I did my ride in 10, it's gotten a lot less safe. I mean, people are on their phones. I almost got run over in New York. And so I did finish the Lake Ontario one, but that's the only lake I've done. And so I still have the other 4 to do. I'm not sure if I'll finish the other 4 or not. I've got some other projects I'm working on too.
You, in your book, in Hiking Through, you made a comment, and forgive me, I don't have the exact quote, but I remember you saying something about before the hike, you were considering maybe not doing this. This is a drastic thing, quit your job, take all these risks. And you make some observation to the effect of if you had done that, then you would have missed out on what I believe you in the book called the greatest adventure of your life. Is that still true? Or would you consider it one of these other adventures to be now take the position as the greatest adventure in your life?
No, that Appalachian Trail hike was the greatest adventure because it completely changed my life. It changed my outlook on life. It was in the book, I won't really go into it in detail, but in the book there was a day in Massachusetts where I was literally, and I'm not that emotional a person, but I just had such a feeling come over me that I literally fell on my face and wept on the trail as I feel God revealed to me that yeah, he was there the day Mary died. And because of that, you're out here on the trail. And since you're out on the trail, you're writing a book and here's a message for you. And the message was a message in my spirit argued and said, well, that's a message for preachers. And I just felt God saying, if you write this book, I'll get that book where I want it to go. I'll get that book where preachers can't go. And in the meanwhile, now since I have written the book and have gotten between 2,000 and 3,000 emails from people, stories, I could write a book on just the stories about how people found this book. They go in a book rack. One guy in Tennessee went and was in a hospital and he was at a book rack, and the shelf collapsed, and all the books fell down, and he picked them up, put them back on, and turned around to leave, and one book fell off, and he was hiking through. And so he bought that book and went out of the hospital. And there's a young man sitting outside the hospital, and the gentleman said, here's a book for you to read. And the guy looked at the book and said, I was planning to kill myself, but I'm going to read this first. And it's that over and over and over and over again. I get an email from a gentleman in New Hampshire who had left his faith, and he said my book brought him back to Christ, and he invited me up to his house, and I've done 2 programs up there. And it's just that when you're willing to be obedient, I tell people, I do a lot of programs, and I say, you know what, I'm not a preacher, I'm a restaurant manager, but a restaurant manager and Jesus is a force. A carpenter and Jesus is a force. A plumber, an attorney and Jesus is a force. And so that goes for anybody who's a believer.
So where can people keep track of what you're doing next? You have a website?
I have a website, and my website can be reached by just hikingthru.com or my name, paulstutzman.com. And I've got pictures on there of my adventures, and there's also all my books are listed there that you can order the books off of my website there. And
where's your next hike?
Well, right now, I'm actually, the Hiking Thru book has done well, and I've had some inquiries about the possibility of a movie made on that one. So we're doing a screenplay on that right now, and hopefully in about a year there'll be a major production on it. I plan to go on the Appalachian Trail again this summer or spring and do like a section hike just for a week or so to kind of get refreshed. I've always had the Pacific Crest in the back of my mind, but I'm not sure. I'm 10 years older than I was 10 years ago, and so the hike it's not very easy. It's very difficult carrying that much weight, and so I don't know if I can get to that level again. So I'll probably just do some section hikes and do that at least for the time being.
Plenty of great sections out there.
That is true.
All right, well, thank you very much, Paul, for joining us and telling us about your adventure and telling us about your healing on the Appalachian Trail. Highly recommend the book to anyone interested in a different and unique perspective on hiking the AT and about how the AT can, and your own experiences, how it was used to help bring you through the grieving process and to heal, and as you say, find freedom on the Appalachian Trail. So thank you very much for joining us, Paul. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Josh, for having me.
And thank you, viewers, for watching. We hope you'll join us again next time on Trailheads, where we will introduce you to someone else who loves the trail as much as you do. Until then, we hope you have very happy trails.